Every time I hear the name Insomniac Games, I swear my wallet gets lighter. This studio of incredibly talented people is responsible for several of my favorite franchises, and I've already talked about 2 of them just on this platform. For a development team with so much recent history, releasing Spider-Man Miles Morales and Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart within months of each other, Insomniac has a very rich history. Determination is definitely the story behind this group, starting with a 9-year-old intent on being a part of the gaming industry from the moment his hands touched an Atari 2600. Let's start with him, shall we? Mr. Ted Price, founder and CEO of Insomniac Games, was always encouraged by his parents to be creative, and as soon as he got an Atari 2600 for Christmas, he knew he wanted to make games. Yeah, he wasn't exactly sure what that would entail, but the next year his family got an Apple II computer and suddenly all the tools were there for him to chase after his dream. This started his foray into programming, and he built some rudimentary games as he grew up. While he didn't end up pursuing computer science in college, he still maintained that passion even once he moved to California to work on his uncle's medical company. Then, at the age of 26, he stepped out on those childhood aspirations and founded Insomniac, along with 2 brothers he'd met through college, Al and Brian Hastings. What's interesting is there was a chance we could have been talking about Extreme Software, The Resistance Incorporated, Moon Turtle, or Ice 9 Games in this all-in. Other name ideas the team considered, and funny enough, the moniker we call them by now wasn't even their first choice. As for the first game these talented people were going to put together, many don't realize this initial foray looked a whole lot like something that changed the industry forever, a little game named Doom. This first-person shooter was titled Disruptor, and if you look at the 2 side by side, it's pretty easy to compare them. Price even said himself the only thing inspiring him in making Disruptor was Doom, and that he was a big fan. This was back in the 90s, but even then you can see developers chasing after what excited people like they do today with trends like open world games and Battle Royale. After the company put together a demo, they started pitching it to different publishers. Among the people who got to listen to said pitch was the legendary Mark Cerny, who was at the time an executive producer at Universal Studios Interactive. Yes, we know this guy is the iconic mind behind the development of the PS4 and PS5, but before his soothing voice was talking to us about SSD speeds, he worked on the likes of Marble Madness, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and even assisted Crystal Dynamics in being the first American developer to get their hands on a development kit for the very first PlayStation. While I don't want to stay on Cerny's profile long, if not for his guidance, Insomniac may have never reached the heights they have today. While Insomniac had their game picked up by Universal, they had a quandary on their hands. The 3DO they had been developing Disruptor for, due mainly to the inexpensive development kit, did not look like it was going to perform well. Because of Mark Cerny, with Universal sharing his sentiments that the 3DO wasn't a safe bet, Insomniac converted their engine over to the PlayStation, and the beginnings of many partnerships began. Now, Insomniac has worked on a ton of games, and they've created some of your and my favorite titles. I don't have all the time in the world to go over every single detail of every single title, but I do want to highlight some of the successes of Insomniac Games over the years. You may not have known about their first game in Disruptor, but you definitely know the second game series they created, Spyro the Dragon. Spyro is akin to Crash Bandicoot when it comes to how recognizable the character is. He's been in a bunch of video games, made the Toys to Life genre popular, and even had his own TV show. But Spyro didn't start there, and Insomniac wasn't even sure he'd make it further than one game. When the team came off of Disruptor, they wanted to make something different. At the time, Mario 64 was sweeping the market, and Price & Co. even had a Nintendo 64 in the office to play it on. They wanted to get away from the dark, grungy shooter genre, and Mark Cerny felt like they could make something more family-friendly that would appeal to the massive audience Mario 64 was grabbing and that PlayStation was lacking. This happened right around the time artist Craig Stitz mentioned doing a game about dragons, and the group was energized thinking about the possibilities. Pair that with a new game engine designed by Al Hastings, the current chief architect at Insomniac, that focused on a panoramic viewpoint, and Spyro the Dragon was born.
Where's Nasty Nork? I'll torch him.
Spyro didn't start out that well. being a critical darling but selling abysmally. But then at Christmas, the game blew up and sales exceeded 2 million copies. It was such a hit, Sony wanted another one for the next holiday season, and Insomniac had to expand to a whole 13 developers, which is ridiculous for me to think about in terms of development today. I mean, Assassin's Creed 2 had a team of 200 behind it. Anyways, the Spyro games continued to be successful, but after the third entry, it was time to move on to something new. And in came Ratchet and Clank.
You can stop calling me sir. The name's Ratchet.
Pleased to make your acquaintance, sir.
We've already talked about them enough in another All-In, and I'm sure you're here to pre-order or pick up your copy of Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. But my gosh, what a series. Insomniac does such a great job of letting their creativity do the talking. And that's exactly what Ratchet and Clank does. So far, the franchise has sold over 25 million copies, so it's no wonder that Sony greenlit a return to the series. Now, after this comes one of my favorite titles in the Resistance series. Come on, people, maybe if we talk about it enough, we'll get another one. It had everything. Aliens invading during World War II, intense first-person shooter action sequences, and an insane arsenal of World War II and alien weaponry. If you haven't tried the series, I highly suggest them, as it takes the weapon stylings from Ratchet and Clank and meshes it with a really interesting alternate history narrative. While Insomniac had partnered with Sony for years at this point, they decided it was time to see other publishers, branching out in both business and portfolio. During this time, Insomniac would drop their first multi-platform game in Fuse, make another game that needs a sequel in Sunset Overdrive, We Know You Own the IP Now PlayStation, and a little game published by GameStop that has a bunch of heart and Song of the Deep. Insomniac even dabbled in VR, making a few Oculus Rift titles in Edge of Nowhere, Feral Rights, The Unspoken, and Stormland. The move that redefined the studio and brought them to even greater heights, however, was when they dropped the bomb at Sony's E3 2016 conference that they were making a Spider-Man game. As we found out in 2018, Insomniac didn't just make a Spider-Man game, they made the Spider-Man video game, releasing it to great critical acclaim and love from fans worldwide. Marvel's Spider-Man felt fresh and vibrant, telling a new story that wasn't confined by a comic and building stellar gaming mechanics that left you wanting to just swing around New York for hours. It was a triumph by Insomniac, and the follow-up in Miles Morales showed us these are the perfect developers to handle our beloved webheads. A year after the achievements of Spidey, Insomniac finally chose to join the PlayStation family. They didn't do it because they had to, but because they felt at home making games on the platform they started on. It's kind of the culmination of their journey, taking some time to figure out who they were and what they wanted to be. I remember after the announcement there being a couple of joke stories about Insomniac employees being surprised by the news because they already thought they worked there. But to be honest, half of us probably thought so as well. Insomniac plus PlayStation just seems right. Insomniac Games is a staple of the gaming industry. They were there when the mascot games started, and they were one of the first to help establish the PlayStation brand. They continued on with that, making more characters we know and love like Ratchet and Clank, who are still going on today in the form of Rift Apart. And now, they're even coming up with new stories for my favorite childhood character in Spider-Man, even diving further into the Spider-Verse with Miles Morales. Insomniac always seems to find a way to make original ideas into innovative and inventive games, and as long as they keep creating them, I'll be there to buy them.